Thank you both, and thank you everyone, and welcome to you all. Welcome. It's Happy New Year, everyone. We're in 2021. We made it. I think everyone's probably feeling that we're not necessarily going to miss 2020. It's definitely a challenging, one of the probably the most challenging years of perhaps of almost all our lives. Still, we're not out of the woods, of course, and maybe it's be the summer or maybe even into the fall before we're back to something approaching normal. As we know, it won't be the old normal. It will be a kind of new version of things. But and I was just sharing before we got going that I don't really feel like the new year will be properly started until January 20th. They're kind of like that. Well, I'll feel that I'm able to kind of breathe a kind of a sigh of relief when that comes. Fingers crossed that everything moves forward as it's set to do. And yeah, and just reflecting on that. What I'd like to do today is do something a little bit different, maybe start differently than we have been doing since we've been doing the online, which is about 10 months now. And turn things around a little bit and see how this goes. So it'll be an experiment, and I'm always flexible. If you have feedback on things that are working for you or not working so well for you, please feel free to either share it in the chat. You can send me a personal message if you like, if it's something you'd prefer to share with me, or share and send an email. I think probably almost everyone has my email. I'm happy to share that as well. Just on, if things, something's working better for you than something else, or and obviously, how we do it reflects a number of different things, and it's not, it's kind of what works. To some extent, it's a balance of utilitarianism of the greatest good for the greatest number, as it were, and also some sense of, as the teaching the class, what I think would be the most helpful things, but are hugely open to feedback on anything. So please feel free to share in whatever ways feels right for you. And so what I thought we would do, at least start with, is start with shifting around the order of things. And so to begin with a meditation. And the rationale for this is really that sometimes when I get to talking, the talk can go on a little longer than I might have originally planned, and it kind of tends to squeeze the meditation and squeeze the movement, and so that's just the rationale for it. And so I thought if we began with the meditation and then shared the talk or the reflection and then the movement and then the sharing, I think there's a kind of a strong interest in having the opportunity to share with others, sharing groups of what's coming up for you, that we definitely have the aspiration of doing that, maybe not every week, but as often as possible. So again, just to welcome you all. Seeing folks, Kerry from Saskatchewan, Canada, just highlighting those from outside of our immediate area here in the Washington area. Debbie from Boston, good to see you. Elizabeth from Memphis, Tennessee, good to see you. Welcome to you. And Gaithersburg doesn't qualify, but nice to see you, Kirsten. Welcome, Rockville, Arlington, Virginia. Ruth from the Jersey Shore, welcome. Bethesda, Capitol Hill, Rockville. Patricia from St. Petersburg, Florida, welcome, welcome. Diane from North Carolina, good to see you. And Kerry Mera, good to see you back from New Jersey. And Debbie from Staunton, Virginia. I think maybe I said St. Petersburg, but Patricia. So welcome to everyone. So we'll begin with a sit, period of meditation to help us arrive and settle. Good to see you, Betty and Joe from Charlottesville. And Collins from Walnut Creek, California. So take a moment, some moments to arrive and settle. You can close your eyes if you're comfortable. Closing your eyes. Let your attention come inward. You could invite the attention to move down out of the thinking mode, down into the body, feeling the sensations of the body. Feel how your body touches the surface, surface beneath you, your chair or your cushion, or whatever you're in contact with. Feeling your feet touching the floor. And your hands in your lap or on your knees. You might feel your breathing. Notice how the breath is as we begin sitting this practice together. You might consciously invite the breath to deepen. Take a nice full deep in breath, filling the lungs, filling the chest. And then releasing long, slow out breath, deep out breath. Releasing, letting go on the out breath. Imagine you're inflating a balloon as you breathe in deeply and then releasing the air, releasing the breath as you breathe out. Breathing in, calming the body. Breathing out, calming the mind. Letting the breath help you settle into being here. And whenever you're ready, letting the breath settle back into its natural rhythm. In breath and out breath. Another way we can help ourselves relax and arrive is to invite a smile to the face. You could consciously, however you're feeling right now, bring the face into the expression of a smile. It's the corners of your eyes, the corners of your mouth. If it's helpful, thinking, bringing to your mind, into your heart, a loved one, somebody who easily makes you feel happy or joyful, lights up your life. If you can, you don't have to be feeling joyful to invite a smile. The smile has the effect of relaxing the body and the mind. Typically, see if you can invite the smile down into your body, down into the heart area. You might let any pleasant feelings kind of move and expand through the body. Feeling a sense of ease in being here now. We can begin our meditations in different ways, and sometimes it can be helpful to reflect on gratitude as a way of shifting our focus from what's wrong, what we think is wrong, or what we think we need, to what we already have. So if that's helpful to you, just to reflect on some things in your life that you feel grateful for. And allow yourself to take in any feeling of appreciation, of gratitude that comes up. Feel it in the body. Feel it in the mind. You could send yourself a wish of loving kindness or compassion. If you're experiencing anything that's difficult or painful, simply putting your hand on your heart, maybe on your belly, can be an expression of compassion for yourself. Maybe a wish of loving kindness out to everyone who's here, all of us here together. May you all be safe, healthy, held in loving kindness. And inviting a receptive attitude to whatever is present for you right now. You might scan your body, your emotions, your mind. And just notice what's present. See if you can make space for whatever is here right now, whatever's present. Just hold it with kindness. Letting whatever bodily feelings, emotions, thoughts moods, whatever's here, whatever's in your environment, whatever the sounds, the smells, the tastes, the images, letting them all be held with kindness, with acceptance, with interest, with curiosity. Welcoming the guests in Rumi's image of whatever's coming. Can it be met as like a guest coming to visit? The beloved Vietnamese Zen teacher Thich Nhat Hanh speaks of the miracle of mindfulness. The Miracle of Mindfulness has a book by that title. And the way I think of the miracle of mindfulness is that whatever is present in our experience can be transformed by the way we meet it. So if there's some sadness present in you around some issue in your life, some loss you're experiencing, or something or somebody you're missing, we tend to think of that as kind of a solid thing, this sadness, or this anger, or this fear, or whatever it is. We think of ourselves as then meeting this thing, this emotion. But if we can meet this energy, this emotion with kindness, with care, with acceptance, we actually transform the experience itself. So the experience itself, the thing that we think of as a thing, actually becomes different. It's transformed. And with practice, it becomes less problematical, less of a struggle. So this practice of meeting our experience with kindness is really a pathway to deep freedom in our lives. Because the things that we thought of or think of as problems need not be problematical in the ways that we think of them. And that it's a training. It doesn't happen automatically or necessarily immediately. But with kindness, making space for whatever is present. So letting the breath be a support for your practice, for being here, if that's helpful. Breathing in, breathing out. Breathing in, knowing that you're breathing in. Breathing out, knowing that you're breathing out. Just meeting and holding whatever is present with kindness, with acceptance, without resistance or without holding on. And if we notice resistance or holding on or spacing out, we can just recognize those. Name them if it's helpful, clinging or resisting, and just invite a softening, a relaxing back into just this receptive, kind attention. And whenever you notice the mind has moved off into thoughts or stories, plans, memories, just see that as a kind of a natural, maybe habitual movement of the mind, not a problem. And just gently incline the mind back to the breath, back to the body, back to your direct experience here and now. Share Wendell Berry's poem, The Peace of Wild Things. When despair for the world grows in me, and I wake in the night at the least sound, in fear of what my life and my children's lives may be, I go and lie down where the wood drake rests in his beauty on the water, and the great heron feeds. I come into the peace of wild things, who do not tax their lives with forethought of grief. I come into the presence of still water and feel above me the day-blind stars waiting with their light. For a time, I rest in the grace of the world and am free. For a time, I rest in the grace of the world and am free. So I thought for this first session, first class of 2021, that I just wanted to share some reflections since it is a time where we have traditionally do kind of a bit of an inventory of our lives. A lot of people do at this time and think of, what would I like to let go of? What would I like to cultivate more of? To live more in keeping with my values, or who I would, the life I really want to lead. And I think there's a wisdom in that. And, I shared last week about, a change I made in my life 21 years ago, kind of to move into, out into doing, full, wasn't immediately full-time, but really focusing my life on sharing these teachings and practices and moving out of the kind of activist world, the organizing world, and how for me that timing, the end of the old millennium and the beginning of the new one was a really helpful one to kind of concentrate the mind. And I think, the beginning of a year, the end of the year, the new administration coming in can be a good time to think about our life and think our lives and what's working well, what's what maybe needs a bit more attention, where do I feel stuck, where what would be helpful for me to do more of, to do less of, all of the things we often do. And I'm not a big fan of New Year's resolutions per se, because I think they have some inherent flaws to them. That often the intentions are good, but we haven't necessarily done the groundwork, particularly the groundwork in relation to awareness, to help make them really happen. So I think it's more helpful to think of intentions and aspirations rather than resolutions. That's kind of how I think about it more, orient myself more. So I do think it can be a helpful time to, particularly this one, given what we've been through in the last year and the last 4 years, to reflect on intentions. And in recent weeks, excuse me, in recent weeks, I've talked quite a bit about resources or resources, however you like to pronounce that word, the supports for our practice, and I talked about gratitude and how powerful gratitude is, and self-compassion, just the power of awareness itself, and the power of saying yes to our experience. So talked about a number of these themes over recent weeks. And I thought I'd like to just focus briefly today on on our practice itself as something to think about and pay attention to at this time. And I want to focus on this because I think it's very easy to take our practice for granted. When I say our practice, I mean, in this case, I mean meditation practice, mindfulness practice, could be more broadly spiritual practice, could include, if you're doing yoga or doing other things. However you define that, whether you define it more specifically as a mindfulness practice or more broadly as a spiritual practice, it's easy to take our practice for granted. How many of us, certainly at certain times, meditate when we can. We do our best. We kind of, I try to as often as I can. We try to be mindful in the day as much as we can, in our relationships, in our, family relationships, our primary relationships, in our relationship with, say, work colleagues or community members, etc. But I wonder how much attention we actually give to our practice. I mean, and I ask these questions certainly not from a place of I should, we should, the kind of wagging the finger, because I think that's probably the worst way of approaching anything, almost anything. I don't think that's and that's not the spirit I'm raising them in, but more in the sense of inquiry, of kind of investigation, of looking like, okay, am I giving the attention to my practice that would actually support it benefiting me in my life? Because if I'm not, then it's probably not going to be providing the kind of support for well-being, for happiness, for freedom that I would aspire to it doing, so that question to how much of a priority does my practice have in my life? And we can judge that not so much by our intentions, although our intentions are really important, but by actually what we do. There's this expression, attention goes where energy flow, and attention, maybe I'm forgetting this. Attention goes where energy flows. I want to say, almost change that and say our intentions go where our attention goes, where we're actually in practice putting our attention is going to really be the demonstration in practice of our intentions. Are we really putting our intentions into practice? How much attention are we actually giving to our practice? For example, with our meditation practice, if we have a regular practice, does it tend to get pushed aside by the business and the busyness of our day? But the things come along, and like a kind of a billiard ball, snooker ball, it gets kind of knocked out of the way, and it's something, I had the intention of doing it, but I had so much else going on. I had to do this, and I had to do that, and I had to do that. Well, again, not from a point of view of should, but a point of view of intention. What are we doing to keep our practice, really at the center of our attention? Because the wonderful thing about our practice is that it affects other areas of our life. That I come back to, you may have heard the story of a Zen teacher who was, who would tell his students, meditate for his or her students, or their students, and meditate 30 minutes a day. And there was one very eager student who wanted really, I think, quick enlightenment, who said, but what if I'm really busy? Said, if you're really busy, meditate an hour a day rather than half an hour a day. And it's a kind of a cute story, and it's kind of funny, but it actually has a lot of wisdom in it, because it's really at the time when we're most apt to kind of get not pay attention to our practice is actually, paradoxically, is when we're often most in need of it. If we're really stressed out, the tendency is, I just don't have time to meditate. But the irony and the paradox is, if we can, at those times of stress, take time to meditate, then what, in the way that I spoke in the meditation about dependent origination, about how the miracle of mindfulness, how the actual experience of stress is changed by bringing mindfulness to it. Try it for yourself. You probably already have, but when we're really stressed out, if we can take that time to meditate, to really pay attention and notice, how does it feel? I'm feeling really stressed. I'm feeling really busy. I've got these stories in my mind about I'm never going to be able to do all of this. My body is all tense and tight. I feel like a pretzel. We're caught up in that way. If we can bring awareness to that, we can begin to untangle ourselves from that stress, because stress is always a story. It's not a truth. There's some things may be true, that people are asking us to do this and we have this responsibility. That's actually true. But it being stressful is our mind's story about what's going on, and that we can change. So we come back and we open to what we're experiencing. We make space for it. Then things change. Even just taking some deeper breaths, we may feel, okay, all right, that was good. That feels a little relaxing. Now and then I pay attention to my experience, and I notice the mind, how I'm getting hooked onto a story. I'm never going to be able to do all of this. That was one of the stories when I was stressed or anxious. I would get caught up in, I'm never going to be able to do everything. It's too much. And then other stories came out of that, like, I'm going to fail. I'm going to let people down. I'm going to let myself down. And then the kind of all the stories that came out of that. And I'd often, I would kind of the joke that what comes from me as a joke is, you end up naked, hungry, alone in a ditch, because the mind has no shame. The mind will just keep on spinning out scenarios of, how bad things can be if we don't pay attention. So this paying attention is crucial. It, as I was saying, kind of transforms the experience itself by how we meet it. So I wanted to share 3 areas of practice to give attention to, that we can pay attention to. I think of them as 3 baskets. In Buddhist teachings, the teachings in what's called the Pali Canon, the kind of the core, the central teachings of the Buddha that came down through the Pali, in the Pali language, written down about 400 or 500 years after the Buddha's death. These teachings were talked about as, within baskets, the baskets of the formal teachings, the baskets of the monastic kind of regulations, the rules for monastics, etc. Anyway, that's kind of a little bit to the side. But I think of these baskets as the basket of formal meditation, daily life meditation, regular, hopefully daily, or as near to daily as possible. The basket of mindfulness in daily life, the more informal practice. If you think of meditation as the formal practice, then the informal practice is, how am I bringing mindfulness into my day? How am I bringing it into my work? How am I bringing mindfulness and compassion into my relationship with family members? We can think of these. Am I bringing mindfulness as I walk about from do the dishes and cook a meal, make a meal or whatever? We can think of this as informal practice. And the third basket, so formal meditation, daily life practice. And the third basket for me, and there couldn't be more baskets, but I'm thinking of formal practice in terms of these three baskets. Study could be a basket in itself, but I'm put that aside. The third basket is more connected with the meditation and mindfulness practice, and that's longer, deepening practice. You know, like particularly going on meditation retreats. And given time will be an issue here today, and I don't want to go on very long on this. So maybe just from about another 7 or 8 minutes, I want to take the practice to, you know, in the order, turn the order around, because typically I begin by talking about daily practice and formal meditation and daily life practice, and then the retreat practice. But I'll just turn it around today and begin with formal retreat practice, because this is perhaps among the folks who are here today, we've got almost 100 of us here today. My guess is that maybe, this is purely a guess, you know, just unscientific, but maybe half the people here in this class have done a longer retreat. Again, it might depend on what you talk about as a longer retreat. You know, and maybe more than that have done a day-long retreat or a half-day retreat. But if we talk about maybe a weekend or a week-long retreat or a month-long retreat or longer retreat, that it's probably less than half have done a weekend or more. And so as the year begins, I wanted to focus a little bit of attention on longer retreats as a really integral part of our practice. It's kind of obvious why, you know, bringing mindfulness into our daily life and doing regular daily meditation will support us in our practice. And I will come back and talk about those, I think, next week. But it may not be so obvious the role that longer retreat practice plays broadly in our practice. But it is something that really, for me, I think, and I think for many other people and many other practitioners, has been really transformational. And so in a way here, I might be probably talking more to people who either are newer to meditation practice or newer to somewhat new to retreat practice. And I want to say some things about retreat practice, and, you know, maybe as a form of encouragement. One of the things that's powerful about taking the time, taking a day or a weekend or a week or longer to practice, is that it gives us an extended period of time to open to our experience and to observe our minds. You know, one of the things I think I've certainly found, and I think others may well kind of resonate with this, is that living through this past year, living through these past 4 years, has been, certainly, I think, fair to say, it's been an intense experience. It's been challenging in many, many different ways. And I've talked in other classes about the ways it's challenging to us. You know, what we've lost, what we're missing, what we have to deal with as, you know, on the daily basis, which is so out of the ordinary for you know, our political life. You know, things that really cut to our hearts. You know, just mentioning the separation of children from their parents, things that are just so cruel and heartless, that they are very much not out of the ordinary necessarily on a global basis, but much of, you know, what we've lived through in our lives, perhaps individually in our families, etc. So it's been very, very hard, I think, in so many ways. And I've talked a lot about this, particularly over this last year. But so that even taking time in doing our meditation practice, taking half an hour, let's say, on a daily basis, doesn't necessarily give us, you know, I mean, it's hugely valuable. I don't want to undervalue it in any way, but in a way it kind of perhaps doesn't get down to the depths that we can reach when we give ourselves a longer period of time. You know, anyone who's been on a longer retreat will probably be familiar with the experience. Say you're doing a week-long or a 10-day retreat, how the first day or two you could be sleeping all practically the whole time, just because, you know, many of us are kind of chronically, you know, don't get enough sleep. We're stressed, the busyness of our lives, you know, maybe it's a little different in the pandemic, you know, that's changed somewhat, but it's still different kinds of things that we're dealing with. That it's almost like the first day, you know, we're in the meditation and we're nodding, we're taking breaks between the sits for sleeping because we're so tired. And you know, sometimes we're kind of criticizing ourselves for it, but it's just very much what comes with the territory, that we're really tired. We need the time. And that's, I give that as an example of how it really can take some time, like that image of, you know, the bottle filled with mud that's shaken up. And it really takes some time for the mud to start getting to the bottom, you know, just to get to a place where we're present enough, kind of energized enough to actually open to our experience fully, and not just dealing with tiredness, restlessness, boredom, you know, just the hindrances being just so much in our face. So in that way, taking a more extended period of time is a huge support to our practice. You know, people have been, you know, I think of it in relation to Martha Postlethwaite's poem Clearing, you know, of creating the clearing in the dense forest of our life. We're doing that on retreat. We're creating the space, creating the clearing in our lives. You know, at first, you know, when we, you know, I talked about the things that tend to come up, but also it can be challenging for us when we do go on retreat, that difficult things come up, old memories come up that maybe we've suppressed, old wounds come up that we haven't, that again, we've kind of pushed, you know, pushed to one side, pushed away, we've kind of kept down. And then as the space opens up, these things come up. So it's not an easy practice necessarily being on retreat. And we need to take the time, train the mind to meet whatever comes up with kindness and with acceptance and with curiosity. But if we give ourselves time, it can also be hugely joyful, peaceful, loving, transformational. You know, things can begin to happen that that maybe we're not so familiar with in just daily life practice, because we are giving ourselves that extended period, that space. On a personal kind of story, the first retreat I did up at IMS, Insight Meditation Society, up in Barre, Massachusetts, back in the early 90s. And, you know, I had the experience that almost everyone has, you know, going on a first retreat. It's challenging, hard to settle, you know, lots of things coming up that are difficult and challenging. But I found after about 5 or 6 days, I began to settle. And one of the things that happened for me was that I connected with a deeper part of myself that I hadn't, that was kind of an older part, that a kind of experience of peace that connected me maybe to times in my childhood when I could just be kind of wandering and no obligations, and kind of, that's what it did for me, and it's different for different people, obviously. But what I connected with was a deeper part of myself that I'd come to become disconnected from, in a way. I recognized how much I loved the peace, how much I loved the solitude, you know, even though I was there with 100 other people, that I really, there was a joy I felt in the peace, in the quietness, in the stillness, you know, that allowed me to kind of go more deeply into myself, into my practice. And, you know, and from that experience, go back into daily life with a different, obviously with a different energy, with a more open heart, with a deeper sense of what was important for me in my life. I remembered after doing that retreat, it was nearly almost 30 years ago, I remember very clearly saying to myself, if there's one thing in my life that I'm really glad I did, it was this retreat. It wasn't as though, you know, there was any, you know, huge awakening, but it was a deep awakening to the peace that was available in myself when I did allow myself to stop, pause, pay attention for an extended period of time. So I said to myself, if there's one thing in my life that I'm really glad I've done, you know, and it's doing this retreat. And obviously what that did for me was it encouraged me to keep doing it, you know, because something that is powerful and transformational, you think, oh wow, if it does this, maybe it does other things as well. So I went back and I did the same retreat the next year, had some very powerful experiences. And I said to myself, if there's two things in my life that I'm really glad I did, it's these two retreats. It's kind of funny, but I actually did say that as well. I stopped it after the second one as it happened, but not that they became any less valuable. So I really share this just as a kind of an invitation, perhaps an encouragement. Most people begin with a day long or a half day, maybe a weekend. But it's whatever kind of speaks to you, whatever your situation, your life might permit for you. You know, if you've got young children, it's not necessarily the easiest thing to get away for a week or 10 days, although, you know, quite a lot of people do find ways to do that with, you know, family members and partners and all of that. So obviously tailored to our own experience. But one of the things that being on retreat did for me, and I've spoken to so many other people who have shared this experience, is it almost like it drops the practice down to another level, you know, to a deeper level. There's a sense of connecting with the practice. You know, for me, it was really a sense of recognizing that I was on a path, that there was a path, or if you prefer, a path, P-A-T-H, if you're hard to understand me, that there was a path that I wanted to connect with. I wanted to be my path, my spiritual path. It was that retreat, that first one or two retreats certainly, that turned my spiritual journey, which I thought of as beginning about 5 years earlier than that first retreat, where I was kind of more on a general search, where that more general journey turned into what I defined and have ever since as a spiritual path. You know, path, and for me, it was a path of the Buddhist teachings and practices. For others, it might have a different description and definition, but very much that was that kind of set me on the path that I've been on ever since. Kind of, it made the journey a more specific in many ways. So what I want to do is kind of make this a beginning of a longer reflection, including those other baskets, but maybe share something that the retreats have in common with our daily life, our meditation practice and our daily life practice is it gives us an opportunity to kind of help untangle ourselves, untangle the of our life, ways in which we get caught up and in suffering, and helps us to kind of like a ball of wool or something that we're untangling, all of these stresses and habits and that aren't working for us, and all of the the ways that we get stuck in our lives, to be able to untangle ourselves from all these three ways, the daily life, the formal meditation, and the retreats, provide really a deep reservoir of well-being. I borrowed that expression from the teacher Rob Beyer that I've been listening a lot to, a deep reservoir of well-being, that when we do get stuck, that we can come back to that reservoir, the reservoir of retreat practice, where we connected with that depth of joy or peace or equanimity that can really be there and be available for us in our daily lives when we do get caught up in stress and anxiety and other forms of suffering. So that expression for me is a powerful one, that deep reservoir of well-being. And retreat practice, I think, particularly can help us develop and deepen qualities that will enhance our lives. The qualities of compassion, equanimity, loving kindness, that we really do need a deeper period of time to help deepen into them. We can do a lot in a half-hour practice of loving kindness, but if you're doing a whole week of metta meditation, for example, or a week of practices of concentration, of samadhi, of kind of deepening, gathering the attention, focusing the mind, you can reach levels of depths of practice that may not be so available on a daily life basis. So let me pause it there as an invitation to you as we begin the year to think about it. A good friend of mine, a colleague, Pat Coffey, at the end of retreats would always encourage those on the retreat. He'd say, get a retreat on your schedule. Because when you've got a retreat on your schedule, even if it's 6 months down the line, that you down the road, that it's something that really does concentrate the mind. It's a kind of, it helps focus. You might get caught up in a lot of stuff. Okay, I've got that retreat that can help me kind of come home if it's hard to do so on a daily basis. Feel free over the rest of the time we're together today, if you want to share any of your experiences in the chat, those who've been on retreats, what it's meant to you, because I've only really touched the surface, I think. Thank you for sharing, Karen, in the chat, and anyone else, anything you'd like to share about your experience. I talk about the other themes next week. But, again, just kind of invite that some time for reflection on that, of what that basket, that practice might mean for you, maybe in the year ahead, if it's something that speaks to you. I don't say it has to speak to you, but it may well do. So with that, what I would like to do is invite Emily and to lead us in some mindful movement practice, which is another powerful basket of support for us. So thank you, Emily. We had some good dialogue in the group. Please feel free again to, if you have any appreciation for people that you were talking to or anything you'd like to share with everybody, please feel free to use the chat to do that. Just to say about the chat, it can be a very helpful resource and just connecting us all. But please, if it feels burdensome to you, please feel free to ignore it completely. You don't have to. There's no obligation to be involved in any of the sharing. It's completely optional. You know, some people find it like, oh, why are people commenting on this or that and stuff? So, you know, just choose not to if it's not something that's helpful to you. Wanted to share some of the things that Santa brought me to in reading matter. This is Rilke's letters to a young poet. This is what my assigned reading for myself over the coming weeks. This is Václav Havel's open letters from 1965 to 1990. I've been, you know, becoming more interested. I mean, I was aware of him, but I hadn't read much of his stuff, so I'm getting more interested. I mean, just a wonderful, admirable human being who died some while ago. And this is Michiko Kakutani's Ex Libris, 100 books to read and reread, which I'm looking forward to reading her book and also some of the books on her list. And this one, which is a doorstop, but obviously a great book as well, is Barack Obama's 700-page book on up to his first 4 years in office. And so what we'll do, because we're getting close to time, I think what we'll do is invite any comments on anything just to be shared in the chat. I'll put those books in the chat. I hopefully have time to do that before we finish. But we can finish with a meditation together and maybe have a little bit of reflection on the time ahead. So if you'd like to, you could, again, just settle comfortably. You know, whatever helps you to re-arrive, to settle again. Maybe taking a few deeper breaths. Inviting a smile. Maybe a few loving kindness, wishes and intentions for yourself, of others. It's always powerful to come back to gratitude, to appreciate all that we have, that it's so easy to take for granted. The singer, songwriter, and poet Leonard Cohen would share that he would begin his concerts typically with his song, A Bird on the Wire. Like a bird on the wire, like a drunk in a midnight choir, I've tried in my way to be free. And he said, it brings me back to my duties. I think of that line of, you know, in some way we need to come back to our duties, using that word in a kind of in a broad sense, not in a finger wagging sense. Just what is it? What is it we're intending to do? So when we begin our meditation, what helps us to really settle, to remind ourselves that this is my, my project, my work for the next 15 minutes or half an hour or however long it is. What is it helps you come back to your duties, come back to the present, be here. Our breathing is a very strong support for coming back. We're always breathing, but we're rarely conscious of breathing. So when we consciously come back to the breath, it's a way of coming back to ourselves, to our experience, to our life. We notice when we come back to the breath that it tends to change by virtue of paying attention to it. It often deepens. Because we notice maybe we're tight or we're tense, and there's a natural, without even consciously doing it, we can just naturally take a deeper breath to help us come back, relax, settle. The smile kind of invites us to a different orientation to our experience. Not so much struggling with what's here, but opening to it receptively, with an accepting, open heart. And cultivating the attitude of acceptance, of kindness, of welcoming our experience. Sometimes welcoming might seem too strong a word. It's hard for us to, can I really welcome this? Can I really welcome this feeling of shame or embarrassment or, stuckness? Sometimes welcoming might feel too invitational. And if it does, then maybe a different image, a different word could be acceptance. Can I be with this even though it's not what I want to be experiencing, but it's what's here? Can I say yes to this even though it's hard, even though it's painful, difficult? And let the breath be a resource for you. It's a place to come back to if it's helpful to you. For many of us, the breath is a helpful home base. Sometimes we use the word home base or anchor, just to keep us present, to help us come back. come back home. So we can come back to the breath. If it's not so helpful to you, you could use sound or bodily feelings or an open awareness as your home base, your place to rest attention. In the time we have, just maybe invite a reflection, see if this is helpful to you. And if it's not, just, let the sound be in the background, the sound of the words be in the background. But if it is, it's just a reflection on what you might leave behind as we kind of go into this new year, this new period. Is there something, anything that maybe you feel is keeping you stuck or caught up in feelings or emotions that aren't helpful to you, aren't how you want to be living? It could be a behavior, could be a pattern of thinking, being unkind to yourself or judging yourself. Could be a belief that you have about yourself or about the world that feels unnecessary or too much or unhelpful, that you might, with awareness and with compassion, leave behind or begin the process of leaving behind. It's rarely enough to say, I'm going to leave it behind. But through awareness, make the choice, the intention to say, this is something that really isn't serving my life, isn't serving my happiness or well-being, that you might leave behind. You might choose not to cultivate, not to give attention to or unnecessary attention to. And if something comes up for you, you might just imagine a kind of a ritual in your mind. You wouldn't have to do this, but you could if it makes sense. Just something, a kind of symbolic way that you might leave it behind. You might imagine in a kind of ritual way, kind of putting it on an altar and kind of imagine setting fire to it or burying it or just letting it be carried off into the winds. Whatever image, if an image comes up for you, just to leave it behind. Perhaps bowing to it. Almost everything we do that doesn't help us at some deep level is intended to help us. We're wanting to be happy, we're wanting to be comfortable, we're wanting to be safe. But we often go about trying to meet those goals or intentions in ways that don't serve us, don't help us. So leaving behind what doesn't serve. And is there something that you would like to develop or deepen or begin that would serve you, that will serve you. Again, not as a resolution, but more as an aspiration, an intention. You have the intention, you have the wish, and then you find the ways of making it real by giving attention to it, on a regular basis, often on a daily basis. Is there something connected, particularly today, with the theme of today, in relation to your meditation practice, your mindfulness practice? Is there a level of commitment, seriousness that you might want to bring that may not be as present as of now? Developing a regular practice, even sitting for 5 minutes a day, 15 minutes a day, listening to a short guided meditation. It's amazing how in a relatively short period of time it becomes like riding a bicycle, the wobbliness at first, but then the movement, kind of moving of its own accord, and our role in it has to be almost minimal at times. Once we get going on a healthy, a helpful habit. So is there something for you? Is it a commitment to sitting a retreat, or bringing kindness to a particular relationship, or meditating regularly, being kind to yourself? And if there is something, can you think of just the initial steps to get you on the road, get you going, get you started? Maybe for a few days you do this. You put this into practice, this intention, this aspiration. You might envision yourself 30 or 40 days down the road where you've actually have set this in motion, and you might think of how it's changed, how you've changed, perhaps how your life may have begun to change through taking these steps. Finishing with these words from David White: enough, enough. These few words are enough. If not these words, this breath. If not this breath, this sitting here, this opening to the life you have refused again and again until now, until now. I'm going to put my email down in the chat here. because there's a couple of questions, so if anyone doesn't have it. And you can, I believe everyone can save the chat if you go down to the corner, very corner of your screen, at least on a desktop and a laptop. And then hit the dots there. And then at the top it says save chat. Couple of questions. Eileen asked, said that you were thinking of Leonard Cohen and the bird on the wire. So yeah, thank you. And then you said, I love the picture of the two blackbirds you have hanging behind you. Is it related to the Leonard Cohen lyrics? I'd like to buy this. Where? Actually, the story of that, I don't know if Margaret is here today, but Margaret, who's part of our community, after my mother died, I shared some poems around, including Mary Oliver's poem about dying, and Patrick Kavanagh's poem, The Death of My Mother. And Margaret was kind enough to create that image and that artistic piece. So I have it hanging on my wall to remember her, the community, and obviously my mother as well. So that's the story of that piece. And if you're here, Margaret, again, thank you for that. It's a lovely gift. We're going to finish up with some announcements today, and I just want to share a couple of very quickly. One thing that's related to our to the theme today is I do have a day-long retreat on next Saturday, January 9th. Check out IMCW's website for that, for January 9th of this year. The theme is a day of renewal and hope. So it'll be kind of some reflections on some of the things we did at the end, what I can let go of, what I can develop and deepen in the time ahead. And lots of time for meditation, and obviously we're doing it online, so you might check that out. I think the other things are available. I do the live session at 9 on Insight Timer, have lots of meditations on there, so if you're interested in that, it's a lovely community of 18 million people, and we normally have a few hundred people on those calls. It's at 9 o'clock on Sunday. And just to mention again, and for many of you this is familiar, that there's not a charge for these classes, but you are invited, if you're able and inclined, to give a donation, Dana, D-A-N-A, how the teachings have come down to us, generosity, through the generosity of teachers and practitioners through the ages, over 100 generations. And we love to keep that practice going. And Dan has shared that in the chat, how you can do that. So Michelle,